Welcome to Nothing But Net and the head coach at the University of Richmond, my old friend, Aaron Roussell. Aaron, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. I know you've had a busy one. We're right in the middle of the season. How's it going, man?
Things are good. We've turned into February. I think this is a stressful time for probably every coach out there. I think probably like a lot of coaches, you've been at the top of the league, been middle league, been bottom league, and every single stop, every single experience this time of year can be really tough. But I think it's a build and excited to see what lies ahead here the next few weeks.
This is a time of year where either you have already had some adversity or you're getting ready to go through it, because no team is void of a dip or a time when the ebb and flow of the season kind of catches them. So having said that, the margin for error is so small when you're playing in conference. How's it going this year for you in your fourth year?
Well, I think, we've had some adversity. I think the availability of some players and some depleted roster, but just, I don't know if we've had a full arsenal here for a while, which puts us in the same category as a lot of teams. But I think you hit it right on the head. And I tell this story to our players a lot to kind of keep the confidence, keep the hope. The 5 championship years, I can think back to something at least one time during each of those 5 experiences of we thought the sky was falling. There's at no point during that season did you think you were still winning a championship. You have to have those. And jokingly said, even one of those years, maybe we tried to, things were going almost too well, that we had to try to create some adversity because we knew we needed to get through something. And, it's going to find you. I think so much of this business as a coach, especially these days, is pushing your kids through that, finding ways to get through that adversity and get better because of it.
I always say the referees are tired, the coaches are tired, the players are tired. And then, all of a sudden we're going to have this lift, right? Sometimes when I'm talking to coaches, I'm like, hey, why don't you just play kickball today or get the wiffle ball bat out and just compete and do something fun and just kind of change it up for them. So they don't have that, body language drag into practice. Like, oh man, we got to do this over. We just played a tough game, whatever it is. What do you do to keep them fresh and engaged?
Well, I think so much of it is trying to be fresh, and I think we're in the middle of a 3-game week, and we've had some unbelievable travel. This has been tough for us, and sometimes you look at the NBA schedule and you look at how little they're practicing, and some of this is walk through, and for instance, for this week, we're heading to Dayton, and I think we have a noon game Saturday, and our practice slot is 6:30 at night, Friday night. That's going to be tough on the road. So there's not going to be much of a practice. It might be, and we had a lot of kids that played 35, 40 nights or 40 minutes last night on a Wednesday. So Thursday, kind of a little bit more of a recovery day most days, but you look at it this week and Thursday has to be some maybe real practice time. Or so we thought until there's a really tough game last night. I definitely believe in that. I think, maybe I've said this to you, I've said it to a lot of other people. The fresher team has the advantage come February and March. Maybe some of that's not always in your control, but you have to find ways to stay fresh. Maybe that's canceling a shoot around and going with it. Baseball season's long. Maybe this is a bad analogy, but Joe Madden back with the Cubs, this was Legion week. So it was like, which to us is like AAU, right? Like there's not the in-depth scouting report. There's not the get to the gym, get to the fields, 6 hours before the game. This is, hey man, get your stuff. We're getting to the gym. We're getting to the field. No batting practice. We're just going to go play. And sometimes those dog days of August, that helped. Maybe it's my Cubs fandom coming back here right now, but I think you just have to find ways to keep it fresh. We've tried the dodgeball thing before, and sometimes all of a sudden these kids' arms are sore for 3 days. So you got to find something that isn't going to be hurt you. But I just think so much of this is the mental approach. We're at a high academic school. There's academic stresses right now, like I mentioned with the travel. These are not excuses, but I think so much of what we all grew up with was more. And we got to work harder. You got to work harder. Sometimes just being fresher is more important. And you know what? You make some shots. We scored 94 points the other night. That was probably the best boost we could get. It wasn't killing them at practice the next day to get prepared for UMass.
Well, that's the thing, right? You're talking reps versus rest. And I think it's a conversation a lot of coaches have during this time of year. Load management, not just playing management, but time management, all of it is so important to the student athlete, and their mental health is such an important topic right now, is making sure everybody feels confident and feels good about what they're doing. I know you have had a very interesting path. And I love your path from high school coaching to being at the University of Chicago and then being at Bucknell. And now, your fourth year at Richmond. What do you think is the greatest lesson you might have learned along the way, Aaron?
I don't mean this to say that other coaches that didn't come that route wouldn't have this, but maybe just, I say empathy for everybody. You've been with a lot of kids that have been high school superstars. Coaching high school boys, it was a great experience. On the women's basketball side, I've coached Division I, coached Division II, coached Division III. So, you've coached kids that their life was basketball. You've coached kids that hey, basketball's cool, but I want to do other things. And I think that's important to maybe the mental health part of it, just to find that balance to make sure basketball isn't. I tell our kids, I don't need basketball to be your number one priority 365 days a year. It needs to be a priority. And some days, yeah, it may need to be your number one priority. But being able to balance that and not making everything to be the end all be all at this level. And, I think the other part of it too, for me, was ability to make a lot of mistakes, still making mistakes right now, coaching 500 games, whatever it may be, you're making mistakes. But I look back at some things when, as a 25-year-old head coach coaching Division III, if I were making those mistakes right now, social media area and a little bit more,
Right.
spotlight on it, you'd look back and there'd be, there's not maybe the receipts for the mistakes that I made back in the day as you kind of learn things with basketball. So I do think that's important. And, maybe a little bit maybe with the parents, I think sometimes in high school you deal with parents maybe a little bit more than you're supposed to now. But we try to include them and try to make this more of a familial thing for us.
I try to tell people all the time when you're going in the gym as a coach, I know you're recruiting a kid, but you're also recruiting the parents, and that tough love that when it comes, you have to know whether you have that support or not behind you, that a family's not just going to yank their kid because they didn't get to play, 25 minutes a game, when they're not in practice every day. So, if you were in practice every day, maybe you would see that, I've asked this kid to corrected them and tried to help them, and then you go in the game and they make that same mistake and you yank them, but if you're not in practice, you maybe don't know those things. Today, the portal and the business of basketball is such an important topic. I want to ask you about player retention. How do you make sure that you're doing everything that you can to make sure that your kids are having the experience they want? And if there's a red flag or something that comes up that, retention is such a topic that involves roster management every day.
Yeah. I think the interesting part for us is we really just haven't had that turnover. When we first got the job here, we took an ACC transfer. Somebody we'd been talking to when I was still at Bucknell came here. We didn't have any space available. I said we didn't have any salary cap space. We didn't have any scholarships. So she came really as the only transfer that we've truly had in my 4 years, came as a walk-on. From Boston College. Eventually was able to put her on scholarship and everything. But we didn't have kids leave. Debbie, this is not because, hey, coaches figured this out, how to keep kids happy and keep kids there. The reality is a lot of it has to do with the institution that we're at. Being at the University of Richmond is an amazing academic experience. I think we really try to make this not just about basketball. We talk about that with recruiting too, that, hey, you're thinking about the 5 years, after you graduate, you're talking about 40 years down the road. So I think a lot of our kids are here for more than just basketball. We try to use that with recruiting. But I think also you have to be honest with kids, and I think sometimes, you build relationships. You don't want to lose those relationships. You want to say fix people, but you want to be a part of their growth and their build. But there comes a point of projecting what those next 2 years or 3 years looks like. And we've had those conversations with some kids of, I love you. This is not pushing you out the door in any way, but what part of your happiness, how much playing time on the floor is going to determine your happiness? Because we want you to be happy. If you can accept this role, then yeah, man, let's roll. And we're not trying to push you out the door. We got the job here 4 years ago. We didn't push people out the door. We inherited a large freshman class. Maybe I'm still that old soul that's trying to do this with a build and thinking 2-3 years down the road, rather than just building that year's team. But we just haven't had that turnover to bring people in. This year we have, sometimes I don't even call it grad transfers because, they've graduated, they've kind of added a year. So we've had one of those. But we really just haven't brought in a lot of new kids. Maybe it's within our offense, trying to, the more you know, the more comfortable you get in our offense every single year. So I think there is part of that. Now we'll look at the transfer portal and we'll try to improve. But I think we're still trying to really keep those kids here, trying to do it maybe the old school way. And hopefully we still get some benefit from that.
So let's talk about your team a little bit, Aaron. I mean, you mentioned offense. That's all I really care about talking about. You've got some players that could score. You're just shy of 70 points a game. You're in a league that's very talented with great coaching, good players. And you're, I mentioned earlier, the margin of error is so small when you get in conference play. What is it about your team that people would want to know or want to come and buy a ticket to come see Richmond play, especially if you're going on the road somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think 4 years ago, the A10, and I think everybody in our league would say this, like, we came here from Bucknell scoring, a lot of points and playing fast, doing all those sort of things, and came into a league that was very much defensive oriented. So I jokingly said, hey, at some point here, somebody's got to score some points in this league. Like, it just has to happen. That being said, Debbie, I don't know whatever influence I'm blaming you or giving you credit for, but, I would definitely was one of those, defense wins championships, toughness. We got to be tougher. And there's still a component to that. Don't get me wrong. And there's still people doing this really, really well on the defensive side of it. We don't forget about defense. I think we've been a much better team defensively this year. But yeah, I think so much for us has just been the spacing. I think we talk a lot. And this is hard, right? Especially sometimes you get some academic kids that will run through a wall for you. They'll do anything. Our kids right now will do anything we ask them to. If it execute a play, they can do that. But, I think I've turned a little bit more conceptual based. Maybe that's watching some NBA. Maybe that's just trying to buy into, go in space and go make a play. Go in space, make a read. And so I think that's sometimes hard. There's a lot of gray area with that, with a lot of kids that coaches, tell me what you want, man. I'll do it. Basketball, to a lot of people can be black and white. Maybe years ago that was the thing. I've enjoyed watching, conceptual offense. I've enjoyed watching spacing. I think, even our transition, we're not always playing faster than everybody else necessarily, but I think it's just a spacing of the floor, strategy with our cutting, and we're not always perfect at this. Don't get me wrong. I think if you were to watch some games, you'd be like, oh my God, this is really good. And other times you're like, what was he thinking this game? But again, I think so much of this trying to buy into that kind of forward thinking of where the game is going, of not always just 5 out, but just a lot of spacing, trying to keep the post open. There's been some really, really good coaches doing that really well, and I've enjoyed it. And so I think we were just trying to maybe adopt that and continually improve with that.
I totally see that in the way players are developing, especially taller women that can handle face up, that can shoot it, that can read in the 2-man game. And those concepts that you're talking about are interesting to watch. It opens up the floor. It allows players to make some plays. It gives them some freedom. I know sometimes there's times in the game where you have to make some calls and you have to be able to take advantage, but even teams that switch 1 through 5 give you an advantage if you can read it and if you can find it. A lot of teams switch 1 through 4 and you still try to maintain that 5 matchup inside. But playing conceptually and trying to teach that requires a lot of reps and it requires a lot of film. I know you love to watch film, and I know you've probably been up all night watching film of your game last night. What are a couple of things that you have been able to help your team with through the use of film?
Yeah, I think maybe sometimes over the years, I just thinking back, I think you want to show them so many things because hey, we can fix this or we fix this. And so I think sometimes showing a team a lot of film maybe isn't always giving you the return that you want. So I think sometimes, especially here as of late, trying to talk a little bit more with reads about individual kids and maybe having more side conversations. You got to put that all together with a team. But as much as I've found kids are watching team film, all they're doing is watching themselves anyway. They're not always learning as much from the others. So I sometimes, and give our staff credit with this, maybe it's a little more positional meetings with this. Now I say positions, we probably care less about positions than most out there. But I think there are teaching points with that, going back to your matchup thing. I think if you were talk to a lot of coaches, by here and in the Patriot League, I think, they'd say, hey, we're picking on matchups a lot. I still think that's something that we do. The more movement you have, the better matchups you can get, but also, you talked about, taller taller student athletes these days. I mean, I think that's something that we look for. We want length with an ability to shoot the basketball. And even when we weren't completely playing this way, go back to that position word again, our 4s and 5s were able to shoot the basketball, and I always wanted that, even back to our Division III days. Felt like that was going to space the floor. If we had some taller wings, we were going to be able to post them up a little bit. And so I do think making sure that you can show film to understand what it is that we're trying to get. I think sometimes maybe even we as coaches lose that. They have to know the why. The academic schools maybe even more so, but I think that's just everybody these days. We used to say it was academics, but they need to understand the why. If they understand the why, they can buy into that a little bit more. I probably need to remind myself of that even more so, because I think the other side of this is not bogging them down with too much information, and just playing, especially like we said in a conceptual offense, which we're trying to do.
Spending our time with Aaron Roussell, the head coach at the University of Richmond, on Nothing But Net. Coach, just one more thing I want to ask you about, because as I've watched you over the years, you're a guy that I always say he gets it. Like, because of your path, you get it, right? You get where sports is, you understand the meaning. You've got 3 children, you've got 2 daughters. I always think that helps see a lens about why we do what we do. You're mentioning the whys right now inside the concept of the game, but just the why around sport. It's National Girls and Women in Sports Day, which is a day everyone celebrates, especially those that have daughters, because of the opportunities that women have been able to get to play. And when you take a step back and you think about your career in your family and how they have blended together and what you've been able to do in your career around the game, what would be a couple of things that would stand out to you that you're really proud of? Or when I say Aaron Roussell gets it, what do I mean by that?
Well, first, I appreciate you saying this, and I can think back to some conversations when we first met about, you were talking, and it was just, and there's a lot about moms at that point, but just starting a family. I think when we had that conversation, talk about the guilt, right? You talk about the guilt of when you're at work, you're feeling guilty because you're not at home trying to help with something. When you're at a kid's game or whatever else, there's just that constant feeling of trying to feel guilty. Do my players know how much I love them? Do my kids at home know how much I love them? I want to be there. It's not perfect, but I really kind of, in no way a meltdown, but just really trying to get to the point of like being where your feet are. I know that sounds such an easy concept to live by, but like I feel like I'm apologizing to my own kids. And my 6th grader now, he's like, Dad, I get it, man. Like I get it. And the alternative is to not do this job. And my kids don't want to not be a part of this. They don't want to not have a team here. They don't want to not go to those games. So, as much as I want to do both, and I want to make a schedule that I can be at my son's game, can be at daughter's game, to try to coach Little League baseball, like those are the things that you hear enough coaches at the end of it that are saying, oh man, I wish I would have done this. Or I see you're doing this, man, I wish I would have Little League. And so I never want to have that regret at the end of this for my own players or your own kids. But that can be hard, right? Like with your own players right now, you're trying to get them out of their comfort zone. You're trying to make them better than what they can be. That's difficult when you're trying to also build a great relationship with them, because you're being pushed. Like think back to your parents, right? Your parents are always trying to push you, and that relationship changes after the fact. I would say something, going back to it, really proud of, not that you're not trying to do this while they're here, but like I said, it's a little bit difficult. But after the fact, man, I love the friendships and relationships I have with our alums. Like that's just a really special moment, especially those ones that were champions, especially those ones that maybe go into coaching or have their own kids right now. They're like, man, I thought you were crazy back then, or I didn't see it, I didn't get it. But now they see that. And it's difficult. It's hard. It's a really, really hard balance. I have jokingly said, if I didn't have a family, didn't have kids, I'd be an amazing coach because of just the time that you could put into it. But I do think there's something to be said about understanding the balance, understanding when you're a parent of how to deal with college age kids and other people's kids and children as well.
Like I said, Aaron, you totally get it. And we are so grateful that you have provided incredible service to the game in so many different ways, through not just your own teams, but the way you've impacted your league and the game in general through your different experiences in all 3 levels of the game. So thank you so much for being with us on Nothing But Net. You're always welcome here. We love visiting with you, and can't wait to watch what you do coming up in the next couple of weeks in the A10 race. I
appreciate it. And Debbie, I'm going to use this time to tell you that there is nobody that does it better. There's no podcast I enjoy more than what you do. And I can't imagine there's a better ambassador for both basketball, women's basketball, but seeing you kind of jump over here to both sides, the impact that you're having, I hope you see that, because I can assure you, we all see it, and so many people in this game are very appreciative for what you're doing. It's top tier.